Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Stocks pulling back from record highs with Congress still in a stalemate over a new relief package. We are standing by now for a briefing at the White House. The president expected to take the podium about 15 minutes from now. We will take you there when it happens. Jobless claims dropped below 1 million for the first time since March. But the good news means there might be less of a chance for more stimulus. Apple, meantime, inching closer to a $2 trillion market cap today. Bloomberg breaking the news that Apple is working on a subscription bundle to drive more revenue and also kicking the hit game Fortnite out of the App Store over its payment policies. We're going to get to that in a moment. But first, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle to break down the day that was. Abigail, I know you've been looking at Applied Materials. What are the highlights there?
Well, you know, it's pretty interesting, Emily, because they put up a very strong quarter. They also put up a better outlook than expected. And initially in after hours, the stock was reacting very well. Right now, though, about flat. So it seems as though investors with the stock up about 82% out of the March lows. Actually, now it's popping higher. So it's really all over the map. The last time I took a look at it, it was just about flat. But again, they beat and they put up a better outlook than expected. Very important about Applied Materials, as you know, Emily, a semi-cap equipment company. So this is a company that makes the equipment to make the chips. So this strong quarter and outlook has implications in terms of their strong chip demand, which would suggest that there's strong chip demand from the companies that use chips. So this could be a bullish tell overall. And relative to a different take on the day, however, yesterday, as you know, Cisco reported that was disappointing, weighing in part on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ able to pull out a small gain in the tech index as well. But the reason I'm highlighting Cisco, down 11% on the day, the worst day since 2011, and they had a very disappointing outlook. So you might wonder, well, what does that mean for the rest of, the tech complex and also the corporate IT spend, especially given the fact that you have this strength out of Applied Materials and so many of the other tech companies. You know, Woo Jin Ho, one of our Bloomberg intelligence analysts, he told me, Emily, that this might be a little bit isolated. It probably means that it has more to do with the recovery being slow as opposed to, some sort of black hole in terms of corporate IT spending.
Meantime, Abigail, there were some names that had a good day, Apple being one of them. How does what you're seeing with Cisco impact some of these other big tech names out there?
Well, only time will tell on that. Right now, it seems as though they're isolated. Apple and then Facebook and Google and Amazon, and the latter three are actually not technically tech names. They're consumer discretionary and communications names, but they seem pretty isolated, along with so many other tech names benefiting from the work from home trend. But Cisco, it's so interesting. This is one of the best known tech names out there. They've been reinventing themselves going into software, but they have not put up a record high going all the way back to 2000. It's pretty extraordinary. But the question that you asked is such a good one, because back in 2007, they had a similar situation where they put up, I think, a decent quarter in their October quarter, which they reported in November. So right after the all-time highs, right near the NASDAQ's all-time highs. And then that outlook really seemed to almost be a shot across the bow for what happened in 2008. Let's hope that doesn't happen here, that it really is more isolated. And as Woo Jin Ho said, more a sign that this recovery, as so many economists have been saying, could take longer, especially as we're waiting for this stimulus. But Apple, as you mentioned, what's extraordinary to me about Apple right now, Emily, up more than 100% out of the March lows. And it's extraordinary because this is not a penny stock or even a small cap stock. This is the world's biggest stock and company, more than doubling out of those March lows. They obviously put up a great quarter. And as you know, that subscription bundle that they're going to be offering starting in October. But they have to continue to really deliver to keep the shares, the stock so high, Emily.
All right, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for giving us that update. More now on Apple. Epic Games is giving users a new way to pay and make in-app purchases directly from Epic, which would mean they don't have to give Apple that typical and controversial cut. Because of that, Apple has yanked the parent company of Fortnite from the App Store. Epic now suing in return. For more on this late-breaking story, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. What is Apple saying here, Mark? What is Epic saying here?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, Apple is saying that they removed the application because they purposely violated the Apple payment guidelines. What happened was this morning, Epic put out a statement saying they've remotely updated Fortnite, obviously one of the most popular games in the world, to allow people to pay Fortnite directly, saving them from giving the 30% cut to Apple. Apple said, hey, we're not going to allow you to publicly, make fun of us and circumvent the App Store rules, so you're gone. Minutes later, I think it was about 15 minutes later after Apple did this, Epic announced that it's suing Apple. So basically what happened for all intents and purposes is Epic baited Apple into removing the app so they had additional means to sue them. And this is not a great situation for Apple. This is a real boiling point amid the antitrust scrutiny. And it really took a company like Epic to stand up to Apple, given its, sheer size and wealth and, financial abilities.
Right. Certainly big news if you are a player of Fortnite, but also for other app developers out there. In the lawsuit, Epic talks about this as yet another example of Apple flexing its enormous power to maintain its 100% monopoly. Spotify, Mark, as you know, has been another company that's been pushing back against these fees that Apple charges. I just got a statement from Spotify in my inbox applauding Epic Games' decision. And we spoke with Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic Games, a couple of weeks ago about this very issue. He has a problem with not just Apple, but also Google and the way that they run their app stores. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, it's a duopoly. There are two companies together. They control 100% of the smartphone market, or something like 99.9%. And if you look in a lot of territories, Apple has the majority of revenue in many of these countries. Other countries, Google has majority of revenue, but it's impossible to look at a territory and say that in this place, Apple or Google is not a monopoly. They have monopoly, and they have business practices that only a monopoly could get away with.
Now, in its response, Mark, Apple is saying that all app developers are treated equally, that Epic wants a special deal. Is that the case?
Is that the case? Well, you could say that Epic is trying to get a special deal. What they, however, say in their lawsuit is they're not suing for any monetary damages, and they specifically say in their lawsuit they don't want Apple to grant them an exception, right? They say they're suing Apple, so Apple changes its policies for all developers. Now, would Epic be upset if they got a special deal from Apple? Probably not. Is that ever going to happen? Probably not. And so they really seem to be wanting, large-scale change. And you saw Spotify, I have the same statement, chiming in about this as well. And this could create sort of a reckoning here if more companies are going to continue to chime in. Right? What we're seeing here is basically gaming companies over the past week doing to Apple what Congress really didn't do. They basically let Apple off the hook. And perhaps compared to Amazon, Google, and Facebook, the situation with Apple is not as bad. But clearly they didn't make enough of an impact for, Microsoft, Facebook, and now Epic Games and Spotify to chime in.
Meantime, Mark, you broke another story earlier today that Apple is working on a subscription bundle, basically putting all of its services into one package that would be cheaper to purchase if you are a user, including iCloud, including Apple TV services. Talk to us about how you understand this would work.
So basically what you'll be able to do is instead of subscribing to all the Apple services individually and paying for them individually, you'd be able to subscribe to a bunch of them. So whether that's Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, plus Apple Arcade, News, etc., all for one cheaper price. And what that will allow you to do is basically save potentially upwards of $5 a month if you subscribe to, several Apple services. For Apple, this is going to create larger recurring revenue. For consumers, if you're already subscribing to a bunch of services, you might be saving a few bucks a month.
All right, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, thank you so much for getting us those scoops today and for joining us to weigh in. All right, coming up, WeChat and TikTok banning or downplaying the looming threat of a ban in the United States. Could have a big impact, though, on companies like Apple. We'll discuss coming up. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Tencent earnings out yesterday, reporting its highest revenues in 2 years due to a pandemic-induced surge in business. But the massive Chinese conglomerate still coming to terms with what a ban on U.S. operations of its WeChat service could mean for its business. That, along with TikTok, amid national security concerns by President Trump. Joining us now to discuss, Graham Webster, Stanford New America China editor-in-chief. Graham, thank you so much for joining us. 83 days to go until the election. What do you believe Trump is really trying to accomplish with all of this?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. There are longstanding legitimate concerns about China that the Trump administration has been working on, but it's unavoidable that over the last few weeks, the Trump administration has been upping tensions with China and using China issues as a way to kind of push attention away from, failures at home, the COVID situation, and even from, a slumping trade agreement with China. The phase one trade deal wasn't so big in the first place, and it hasn't really come to pass in the way that it's intended.
Now, China is saying it's going to bring this up at the next round of trade talks within the week. Talk to us about what is at stake here.
Well, right now there are executive orders that would ban U.S. business with both TikTok and Tencent. It's the parent company of WeChat that we've just been talking about. In your previous segment, you were talking about Fortnite, and they're owned partially by Tencent as well. The reach of an order that would actually shut down U.S. business with Tencent would be huge. It would make it very hard for people to engage in normal business and kind of contact across the borders. And if they went as far as they could, it could even result in pulling the apps out of app stores globally from the U.S. companies Apple and Google. So there's really an enormous potential, but we don't know what might happen. There's several days left, several weeks left to negotiate, and there's a lot of wiggle room for the administration. They can kind of do what they feel they need to.
Now, we're standing by for the president to deliver one of his daily news briefings. Would you say this is inching closer towards, a Cold War type of scenario, or is that too extreme?
I think that some people in the Trump administration are trying to push toward something like a Cold War scenario that would be durable and would be hard for the next administration, whether it comes next year or later on, to undo. There are people who've wanted more conflict with China or believe that it's already there and they want to kind of cement it. I think that's strategically wrong, and I think that it would break a lot of potential for mutually beneficial ties. It would also stop, useful engagement to fix Chinese misdeeds in human rights and in the markets around the world. But I think people are trying to build a new Cold War.
What about the impact that this could have on a company like Apple, Walmart, companies that have, Apple, for example, the reason you buy an iPhone in China is to use WeChat, and it is a huge business for them selling iPhones in the country. What about the knock-on effect this could have on U.S. companies that President Trump has also tried to protect?
Well, U.S. companies really depend a great deal on supply chains that stretch across the world, but especially in China. If something like a Cold War or a really hard decoupling were to happen, that's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of effort to get new supply chains. And some diversification was already coming. Labor prices in China have been rising. Some manufacturing has obviously been going to Southeast Asia and India and elsewhere in the world. But forcing a rearrangement based on geopolitics and not on kind of market demands is going to be very costly for many companies, especially someone like Apple, who has invested so much in a highly advanced supply chain in China over the years.
Meantime, you have TikTok still doing business deals, just striking a $10 million deal with the New York Yankees. I mean, do you believe that TikTok and WeChat are actual security threats?
Well, it's a matter of degree. So, any mobile app that collects a ton of information has a bit of a security concern or a privacy concern. And it's heightened, certainly in the case of these companies, because the parent companies are Chinese. But you have to look at what the actual threat would be. And if you're not handling highly sensitive information, whether it's for the government or for your company, the personal privacy concerns when you're talking about the Chinese state, spy agencies are a little imaginative, because in most cases they're just not going to be that interested. I think this is very different from something like Huawei, where there are real serious concerns that you might not want infrastructure run by machines that could be more easily controlled by a potential adversary. But those kind of differences are getting blurred together.
Now, Foxconn, which assembles iPhones, has said that China's days as the world factory are over. Foxconn is one of the companies that's diversifying its manufacturing outside of China. I mean, do you think that's true? Chinese state-run media has pushed back against this idea quickly.
Well, I don't think that China is going to stop being a major manufacturing hub, but I think some diversification is called for. As I mentioned, labor prices have been going up for years in China as the country gets richer in general. And so capital wants to find cheaper labor, and some diversification is going to happen. I think it's going to be really hard to overcome, though, the type of industrial clusters and the sort of rapid prototyping capabilities that you get in a place like Shenzhen.
All right, Graham Webster, thank you so much for joining us, Stanford New America editor-in-chief for the DigiChina Project. All right, coming up, Coda is the relative newcomer in the red-hot area of workplace productivity. We're going to talk to the co-founder and CEO on taking on Google and Microsoft next. This is Bloomberg. The workplace productivity company Coda may be some years away from scaring off Google and Microsoft, but the company not going unnoticed, just raising a huge round of funding, $80 million, bringing its valuation to over $630 million. Joining us now to discuss, Coda co-founder and CEO Shishir Mehrotra, who worked at Google and Microsoft for many, many years. So obviously, work collaboration is in the spotlight right now with so many workers working remotely, and there's an even greater need for better tools to collaborate. What sets Coda apart from Google, Google Docs, Microsoft Word?
Yeah, hi, Emily. Thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I think the world's changing really fast, and so many workplace patterns are accelerating. I'd like to say we're zooming a decade into the future in just a few months. And so every form of that is being reconstructed. Coda is an all-in-one document, so it blends together documents, spreadsheets, presentations, applications into one surface, so you don't have to go between them. But more importantly, in Coda, you can build docs as powerful as apps. And what really happens is you can close the gap between just documentation workflows and the real flows of how your business operates.
That said, it seems like, the vast majority of people are still using Microsoft and then Google. So what kind of traction is Coda getting, and how do you see sort of, surmounting some of these, incredibly entrenched giant companies?
Yeah, I think, and to be clear, I think we get used side by side with many of those tools. So I think, and often integrate very well with them. So I don't think it's necessarily a zero-sum game that way. We've been doing really well. We shipped Coda 1.0 about a year and a half ago, and it's a product that's built to spread. We're up to about 25,000 teams using Coda now all over the world. This year has been particularly good. We've more than doubled revenue this year, and so the momentum is quite high. But it's early days and lots more to come.
How are your thoughts evolving about the future of work? What do you think will be fundamentally different, even if and when we come out of a pandemic and there's a vaccine? I mean, do you think that things can spring back, or is the workplace changed for good?
I think it's changed for good. And, as you mentioned, before starting Coda, I spent about 6 years running the YouTube teams at Google, and spent a long time at Microsoft before that, and I've been running some form of distributed teams for over a decade now. I like to say that if companies lean into that form of work, into being able to work remotely, work in distributed offices, and so on, the best practices you develop are actually better for your company. In other words, if you do distributed well, you're probably a better company in general. And so I think that what we're watching is companies learn those behaviors, and they won't want to go back when they realize it corrects for a lot of issues that companies naturally have. So I think it's here to stay.
We're standing by now for the president to. Okay, we're standing by now for the president to take the podium at the White House. And I'm curious for you, as a growing business, obviously we've talked a lot about how small businesses are suffering in the pandemic. You know, how do you expect business in Silicon Valley to change as we come out of this? I mean, obviously, I imagine, you know, there are a lot of companies out there that can't raise funding right now. There are a lot of people who've lost their jobs. There have been a lot of layoffs in Silicon Valley. And as somebody who has worked here for so many years, what do you think the broader impact of this will be on Silicon Valley itself?
I mean, it's fairly extreme, right? As you mentioned, there's some companies for whom the pandemic is devastating, and some companies for whom it's enabling or accelerating. You know, code is obviously in the latter camp, but as an industry as a whole, there are many companies that are struggling through it. You know, I think moments of disruption have tended to be very positive for Silicon Valley in general. The crisis in 2009 led to a number of really great companies getting created. And I think for a region that thrives on change and innovation, any change is a good time for people to try new behaviors, try new tools. You know, certain businesses hurt, but other businesses really flourish. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation in this period.
Technology has thrived as a result of being, you know, such a driver of allowing so much of this work to happen from home, us to remain connected while we are sheltering in place. At the same time, you've got intense scrutiny in Washington on big tech companies. Do you have any concern that these companies will become even more powerful, though, as a result of the pandemic, and that it will be harder for smaller companies, smaller startups to actually break through?
I'm generally of the mindset that companies getting too large is not good for the industry, and I think there's a healthy balance to be struck. Having worked at a couple of the largest tech companies, I think I've seen both sides of how companies operate when they're checked and when they're left unchecked. And I wouldn't be extreme on either side of that, but I think we're clearly in a world where many of the behaviors of the companies are indicative of them having scale that was unprecedented for most marketplaces. So I think they can be pulled back.
Shashir, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. The president speaking now. Let's listen in.
Announced by Attorney General Barr that they've caught the killer of Legend DeFaro, horribly shot, young man, wonderful young man, and we have this just came out 2 minutes ago. So Attorney General Barr just announced, as you know, we named Operation Legend after Legend DeFaro, where we're going to be helping out and are in the process of helping out cities throughout our country that have difficulty with crime, in particular certain types of crime. So that's really good news. They caught the killer of Legend. Today we saw Joe Biden continue to politicize a pandemic and to show his appalling lack of respect for the American people. That's what it is. At every turn, Biden has been wrong about the virus, ignoring the scientific evidence and putting left-wing politics before facts and evidence. Sleepy Joe opposed both the China and the Europe travel bans. You know that. He opposed the China travel ban that I instituted very early, and the Europe travel ban that I instituted quite early. If he had followed, if we went after and listened to his advice, hundreds of thousands more people would have died. This is according to many people. I believe that Dr. Fauci agreed with that. He said that President Trump made a great decision when he put the ban on China. Joe Biden wants to fling open American borders, allowing the pandemic to infiltrate every U.S. community based on his policies. He wants to have ridiculous open borders. I've been saying from the first day I started campaigning for this great office that you have open borders, you don't have a country. You don't have a country with open borders. So he wants open borders. The Democrats want open borders. And if you take a look at our southern border, we would have criminals pouring through. The wall is getting close to 290 miles long, and it's having a huge impact. So we disagree with him on that. That's one of the many things that we disagree with. But while Joe Biden would allow rioters and looters and criminals and millions of illegal aliens to roam free in our country, he wants the federal government to issue a sweeping new mandate to law-abiding citizens. He wants the President of the United States, with the mere stroke of a pen, to order over 300 million American citizens to wear a mask for a minimum of 3 straight months. I guess this just happened. He thinks it's good politics, I guess, no matter where they live and no matter their surroundings, because different states are much different, both in terms of the atmosphere itself and also in terms of the corona problem. He does not identify what authority the president has to issue such a mandate or how federal law enforcement could possibly enforce it, or why we would be stepping on governors throughout our country, many of whom have done a very good job, and they know what is needed. Also, many of our 50 states are doing the job at a level that, frankly, people are really surprised, including foreign governments that are calling us constantly and asking for advice. So I want to just say our governors have worked very hard. They've worked with Vice President Pence and myself and everybody else that's been going. We have Scott now involved, and so Scott, congratulations, but you'll be working with a lot of governors. You've already started, and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. If the president has the unilateral power to order every single citizen to cover their face in nearly all instances, what other powers does he have? That's why he refused, Biden, to take questions. He couldn't answer any of them, couldn't answer the questions. He refuses to take questions. He never takes questions. I take questions. He never takes questions. And you sort of wonder what's going on, because they're not that difficult. Some can be nasty, but they're not that difficult. But he never takes questions. So he just, I guess, left. I didn't see it, but I guess he just left the podium. Put it in your minds. My administration has a different approach. We have urged Americans to wear masks. And I emphasized this is a patriotic thing to do. Maybe they're great, and maybe they're just good. Maybe they're not so good. But frankly, what do you have to lose? You have nothing to lose. So we do, and we've been saying wear them when it's appropriate, especially in terms of social distancing, if you can't distance enough. And what do you have to lose? But again, it's up to the governors, and we want to have a certain freedom. We want to have a certain freedom. That's what we're about. At the same time, we also understand that each state is different and is facing unique circumstances. You have very, very different states facing very unique differences and circumstances. We've entrusted the governors of each state, elected by the people, to develop and enforce their own mask policies and other policies following guidance from the federal government and CDC. We're working with each state to implement a plan based on the facts and science. We will continue to urge Americans to wear masks when they cannot socially distance, but we do not need to bring the full weight of the federal government down on law-abiding Americans to accomplish this goal. Americans must have their freedoms, and I trust the American people. and their governors very much. I trust the American people, and the governors want to do the right thing to make the smart decisions. And Joe doesn't know too much. Unlike the Biden approach, our approach is guided by science. That's why we're focused on protecting the high-risk Americans. That is why we're delivering effective medical treatments to dramatically reduce the fatality rate. And that is why we're developing a vaccine and therapeutics in record time. You'll see that, I think, very soon. Sleepy Joe rejects the scientific approach in favor of locking all Americans in their basements for months on end, which I think is something that Scott would be very opposed to. I think I can speak for you. We've been dealing pretty strongly over the last number of weeks. But he wants them in the basement for months on end. And you have governors that have been very, very strict on keeping people in their houses, keeping people in their, wherever they may be, apartments. And frankly, I don't think the results are necessarily better than other results. But he wants to shut down our economy, close our schools, and grind society to a halt. And he wants it done by a federal decree. This would lead to a crippling, long-lasting depression. This would be a crippling, long-lasting depression. And yesterday I showed you the numbers about how well we're doing coming back with auto sales and auto manufacturing and used car sales and housing sales at numbers that nobody would have believed. And we're back and very strong. It's a very strong V. It's almost a straight-up V. We'll be discussing that over the next couple of days. But the economy is coming back, and the employment numbers over the last 3 months are a record in history of our country. And we'll be back next year. I think we'll be maybe even stronger than the previous year, where we set every record in the book on employment and stock market. By the way, our stock market numbers are very close to record, and NASDAQ is actually record over the last 14 days, 14 times now. It's been record, and that's during what we hope will be the more final stages of the pandemic. So if we did what Biden wanted to do, it would shut down our healthcare system and lead to a massive increase in mortality, including suicide, overdose, heart disease, and countless other physical and mental harms. It is very, very bad on the other side of the equation when you do something like that. Those shutdowns are very punitive, very punitive. They hurt a lot of people in a lot of different ways, through depression, through suicide, through so many other things, alcohol, drugs. Biden's approach is regressive, it's anti-scientific, and it's very defeatist, but it'd be very bad for our country. While Joe Biden has been playing politics from the sidelines, he has no clue. We've been solving problems and delivering tremendous results. The most advanced and robust testing system on the planet, the #1 producer of ventilators in the world by far, unprecedented industrial mobilization, biggest since World War II, Operation Warp Speed to deliver life-saving treatments, and very soon a vaccine. What a plan by Joe Biden has actually laid out would do, we've really already accomplished. In fact, many of the things that was well reported over the last few days, every single thing he said to do, every single thing we did, and we did them well. So Biden has no idea on his own. He only knows what he thinks we should do, and he spews it out, and then he, I guess you could say, he plagiarizes, and he really did in our case, because every single one of the events, I think, Kayleigh, we can say that was something we had already done. So we'll defeat the virus, but not by hiding in our basements. He's got to come out of his basement. We'll defeat this virus through a common sense mitigation effort, shielding those at highest risk and unleashing America's medical and scientific genius, which is what it is. And we've already been doing it, and we're very close to having something that's going to be very, very special in the form of therapeutics and vaccines. To Joe, I would say stop playing politics with the virus. Too serious. Partisan politics is no place here. It's a shameful situation for anybody to try and score political points while we're working to save lives and defeat the pandemic. In times of national challenge, Americans, and we are, by the way, we are working with countries from all over the world, and they're trying to learn from us. And some of the countries that you spoke most well about are having a tremendous surge right now, but it'll work out. But Americans must unite together, and they must put politics aside and have to really unite for a common good. 3 vaccines are in the final stage of clinical trials. They're doing really well. We're producing the most promising vaccine candidates in advance. As you know, part of the largest industrialization ever. It's incredible when I meet with heads of companies that are doing this, that are the best companies anywhere in the world. It's incredible where they are, how they're doing, and the speed with which they're doing it, and also the speed with which the FDA is approving things. Because by any other standard, you would have been 2 or 3 years away from being at the point that we're at. By the end of this week, we will have shipped 1,846 rapid point-of-care testing devices to nursing homes, which are a very important source, as you know, for people that are not handling the plague from China very well. This week alone, we're sending 992 testing devices and 450,000 tests to more than 950 nursing homes across the country. And these tests are incredible. These are tests that are all new, very modern. And we're also getting on the tests that are not done immediately with the 5 to 15-minute timing. When they do send them to a lab, they're coming back now in 3 days. So it's a 3-day process, which is about as good as you can do. You have 1 day of delivering, 1 day of receiving, and 1 day in the lab. We're also requiring all nursing homes to test all members of their staff at least weekly. By unleashing America's scientific genius, we have delivered effective treatments. The case fatality rate for Americans over 70 has declined by about 85%. That's a fantastic number. It's declined. That's case fatality. It's declined by 85%. Europe has seen 40% more excess mortality than the United States compared to a non-pandemic year. So you hear the numbers, and those numbers are very interesting, but that's the way it is. We continue to urge all Americans to wash your hands, socially distance, wear a mask when necessary, and when you cannot, distance and protect, very importantly, the vulnerable. Protect people that are older, and especially people that have problems with heart or diabetes or some other problem. Earlier today, very exciting news, very big news all over the world. They're talking about it all over the world. It was amazing. We finalized a historic peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. After half a century, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. Nobody thought this was something that could happen for a long time. This is the most important diplomatic breakthrough since the Egypt-Israel peace agreement was signed over 40 years ago. We have Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, here. Thank you, David, for being here. We very much, you would agree that this was a big day for Israel and a big day for the world. Good. Thank you, David. You've been fantastic, too. Fantastic ambassador and representative of our country. Thank you very much. The deal that was reached today will enable Muslims to have far greater ability to visit many historic sites in Israel and to peacefully pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is very important to them, which they've wanted to have access to for many, many decades. This is a monumental step to forging ties of cooperation in the Middle East, and I think you're going to have other countries come forward. I can tell you we already do, and they want to make a deal. You could have peace in the Middle East. It would be fantastic. Israel is also suspending settlements in the West Bank, which is a big deal, a bold step toward achieving peace. Israel and the United Arab Emirates have also agreed to immediately expand and accelerate scientific collaboration to develop effective treatments and vaccines to defeat the China virus. They've both been hit. Virtually every country has been hit, 188 countries, and to save lives in their region and in their world. So they are working very much on the vaccines also with us. And again, some very good news is going to take place with respect to that. Our unprecedented diplomatic engagements laid the groundwork for this historic peace agreement, which was just announced a little while ago today. We will not rest as we continue to work toward a world of greater harmony and prosperity for all. I want to thank Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, two fantastic people, for their vision and their leadership, and I look forward to hosting them at the White House very soon to formally sign the agreement. We'll probably be doing it over the next, I would say, 3 weeks, and they'll be coming to Washington. So that was a tremendous day. That was a tremendous thing that happened, and it's a great sign. We have a lot of other interesting things going on with other nations also having to do with peace agreements. And a lot of big news is coming over the next few weeks. And I'm sure you'll be very impressed. And more importantly, it's a great thing for our country, a great thing for the world. So thank you very much. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I want to ask you about school-age kids and food. One of the real problems when you shut down the schools, these are kids on reduced and free lunch programs. They need these meals to make it through their day, and with districts shutting down school, what, if anything, can the federal government do to make sure that the kids still get decent meals as long as the schools are out?
Well, you know, we don't want the schools shut down. We want the schools to open, and especially very young children handle it, all children, but especially very young children handle it very well. So we want schools open. We don't want to be in that position. We want schools open. We've made payment, and we would, frankly, if the school isn't going to open, we would much rather follow the child with the payment, give the money to the child, meaning the parents of the child, and let the parents do what they have to do, including bringing the child to another school, because we're finding that whether it's parents or children, people want to get back to school. They want to have their life back. Some people say the Democrats don't want schools open because that's where you have a lot of polling booths. And if you have a school closed, you can't very easily have polling booths at the school. And that's becoming, I think, maybe we'll be able to show that as fact. But that's another thing that they're doing to try and keep people away from the polls. So we have to look into that. But it's you've been reading about it. I've been reading about it, and I don't like it. But we'd like to see the schools open. Then we don't have that problem. Good question.
Thank you, Chris. President, what's your understanding of how long Israel will suspend this West Bank annexation plan?
What do you think? Tell me.
Well, we're putting all our eggs into the basket of peace. We have an agreement with the Emirates. We're going to nail down all the details, embassies, overflights, commercial. Then we're going to extrapolate that to the rest of the region. How long that takes, I can't tell you, but we've prioritized peace over the sovereignty movement. But it's not off the table. It's just something that will be deferred until we give peace every single chance.
And what do you want the Palestinians to take away from this deal, since they're not really a party to it?
Well, but they are supported largely by some of the countries that we're talking to and that have already signed, in the case of the one country, but others will be following. And I think the Palestinians will, without saying it necessarily yet, I think they very much want to be a part of what we're doing. And I see ultimately the Palestinians, I see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I see that happening. I think as these very big, powerful, wealthy countries come in, I think the Palestinians will follow quite naturally. Yeah, please.
Do you believe that a deal could have been reached without Israel's agreement to temporarily suspend annexation?
Say it again. Could you make it louder?
Do you believe that a deal could have been reached without Israel's agreement to temporarily suspend annexation?
What do you think about that, David? It's interesting.
I think you can't do both at the same time. So I think, again, prioritize peace. Sovereignty, after peace is given every opportunity to turn to sovereignty. I don't think the two could have been done at the same time.
Have you asked Israel to permanently consider abandoning annexation?
No, this is a temporary process. There's been no request.
Okay. Please, Caitlin.
Mr. President, this morning you said that you do not want to fund the U.S. Postal Service because Democrats are trying to expand voting by mail. So I've got two questions for you. One, are you threatening to veto any legislation that includes funding for the post office?
No, not at all. No.
So you would sign something that does include funding?
A separate thing, I would do it. But one of the reasons the post office needs that much money is to have all of these millions of ballots coming in from nowhere, and nobody knows from where and where they're going. You saw what happened in Caitlin in Virginia. It was 500,000 applications coming in, going all over the state. Nobody even knows where they came from. You saw what happened in New York, which was a disaster with Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. It was a basic disaster. And you see Paterson, New Jersey, what's going on there. And we can give you many other locations and sites. What has happened is that's part of a big negotiation. That's actually small part of a big negotiation to get more money to people that it wasn't their fault. It was China's fault. And post office is part of it. Another part of it is they want $3.5 billion just for the ballots themselves. Why it's so much, I don't know, but that's what the Democrats want. But if the bill isn't going to get done, that would mean the post office isn't going to get funded. And that would also mean that the $3.5 billion isn't going to be taken care of. So I don't know how you could possibly use these ballots, these mail-in ballots. Absentee ballots, by the way, are fine. But the universal mail-ins that are just sent all over the place, where people can grab them and grab stacks of them and sign them and do whatever you want, that's the thing we're against.
But isn't that precisely the problem, is that you're saying you do not want to give this post office funding in this coronavirus legislation? They say they need it so they can be prepared. So if the pandemic is still going on in November when the election happens and people don't feel safe to go vote in person, they can vote by mail, and it can be safe and it can be secure.
I can understand the post office, and if we could agree to a bill, the overall bill, which is obviously a much bigger number than just the post office, that would be fine. But they have the post office as one of their requests. It's their request.
Right, but this morning you said you were against it, didn't you?
I'm only against, what I'm against is I'm against doing anything where the people aren't taken care of, and the people aren't being taken care of properly. We want people to get money. It wasn't their fault that they got shut down. They got shut down by China. So whether it's the post office or whether it's the $3.5 billion, they're asking for $3.5 billion just for the universal mail-in ballots, but they're not willing to make a deal. These are 2 points within a very big deal. The thing they want more than anything else, Caitlin, and you know this, is bailout money for the states and for the cities that are in trouble, which for the most part are Democrat-run states and cities. So New York has a problem, California has a problem, Illinois has a tremendous problem, and others. They want to be able to bail out these states, and we don't want to be doing that, or certainly don't want to do it to the extent they're looking for $1 trillion. We don't want to be doing that. Please, go ahead.
I'm just really confused, because this morning you said they need that money in order to make the post office work so it can take all these millions and millions of ballots, and you said that would be fraudulent. So it sounded like you said you're blocking. No, I said it will end up being fraudulent, because if you look at what's happened over the last few weeks, just look at the few instances where this has happened, it's turned out to be fraudulent. Well, if you look at New York, it was fraudulent. If you look at Paterson, New Jersey, it was fraudulent. Of course there is. The whole thing is a mess. In fact, Carolyn Maloney's opponent he's gone crazed. He said they took the election away from him, and he may be right. I think they should redo that election. And if you look at Virginia, it's terrible. Look at some of the things that have happened in California. Look at California, where they found 1 million non-eligible voters. That was done by Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch. We have to have an honest election. And if it's not going to be an honest election, I guess people have to sit down and think really long and hard about it. But if the post office, if they're not going to approve a bill, and the post office therefore won't have the money,
And if they're not going to approve a bigger bill, and they're not going to have the $3.5 billion for the universal mail-in votes, how can you have those votes? What would mean is the people will have to go to the polls and vote, like the old days, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They have to go to the. It doesn't say anybody's taking the vote away, but it means that the universal mail-ins don't work. Absentees do work. It's a very different thing. An absentee where you make an application and you send it in, they send you a vote. It's different. But so, Caitlin, I'm not saying anything wrong with voting. I want them to vote. But that would mean that they'd have to go to a voting booth like they used to and vote.
Even if they don't feel safe voting in person, people want to vote by mail because.
Well, they're going to have to feel safe, and they will be safe, and we will make sure that they're safe. And we're not going to have to spend $3.5 billion to do it. And when you go to a voting, it would be wonderful if we had voting ID, and some states have that, and some states don't because they can't get it passed. Most states want it. But we want people to vote. But we want people to vote, so when they vote, it means one vote. It doesn't mean ballots all over the place. You saw what was happening in Virginia, where piles of ballot applications are dropped all over the state. They had them named after dogs. They had them named after dead people. We want to have an accurate vote. I'm not doing this for any reason. Maybe the other turns out to be my advantage. I don't know. I can't tell you that. But I do know this. I just want an accurate vote. And it's a fair question, by the way. So does everybody else. Okay.
Mr. President, how does the accord today between Israel and the UAE help struggling and persecuted Christians in the Middle East?
Help what?
How does it help struggling and persecuted Christians in the Middle East, the deal today?
Well, I think it's going to. I think it's a big start. And you're right about that. Christians have been persecuted by some countries in particular in the Middle East. And I think this is a big start. It's going to be a very strong start, very powerful start. And it's something that I will tell you, I've told David and I've told every one of our negotiators, if you look at the way Christians have been treated in some countries, it's beyond disgraceful. It's if I had information and if I had absolute proof, some of the stories that we've heard, which is not easy to get, I would go in and do a number to those countries like you wouldn't believe what they do to Christians in the Middle East, and it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. You're right. It's a very big part of the overall negotiation. And as countries come in, for instance, UAE has agreed very strongly to represent us. I think they will very well with respect to Christianity. Because in the Middle East, it's not treated well. It's not treated well at all. It's treated horribly and very unfairly, and it's criminal what's happened. And that's for many, many years. I think it's a great question and it's a very unfair situation. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Larry Kudlow said that there's a routine check-in call with China on the Phase 1 trade deal. My question is, what if they bring up TikTok and also WeChat? Would you instruct your team to engage them on that executive order?
We have a deadline of September 15th, and whether it's Microsoft, I understand, and others are negotiating. We also said that obviously it's worthless if we don't allow them into the country. So we said that the United States Treasury is going to be getting something out of this deal, something very substantial. But what we want is total security. But we have a deadline of September 15th. So I know Microsoft and others are very interested in it, but that's our deadline, and it has to be proven to be totally secure. We don't want to have any information going into China with what we've been through. And I have to tell you, you talked about the deal. You mentioned the Phase 1 deal. Well, the Phase 1 deal, it's a very interesting situation because you've been hearing the largest order of corn in history, the largest order of soybeans, the largest order of beef. They've done more than they've ever done. So you're going to have to figure that one out. With where I'm coming from, I could have, because they see my attitude. My attitude toward China is not friendly, but they have gone into orders that are extremely large, and our farmers are very happy. But with what they did with respect to the pandemic, the plague that came in from China, it just is a different feeling. It was an incredible deal, but I have a very different feeling. But they are giving the Midwest, our farmers, among the largest orders they've ever seen. Somebody told me today, Bob Lighthart, that it's about 40% of what they're selling now is going to China. So maybe they're trying to make me change my mind a little bit, because you know my attitude on China, and it hasn't been very good. Well, we're not talking to them. No, we're talking to the companies. In theory, it's a company, but it's a company within China. That means China. And the deal will have to be substantially beneficial to the United States, and we need total security. Okay?
Mr. President. Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President, can you say whether you yourself think that annexation should be off the table for Israel, and if so, have you communicated that to
Well, not off
Prime
the
Minister?
table. No, it's something they've discussed, but Israel has agreed not to do that. I mean, more than just off the table. They've agreed not to do it. And I think that was very important, and I think it was a great concession by Israel, and I think it was a very smart concession by Israel. But, David, do you have anything further to add on
The Prime
that?
Minister was pretty clear today at his own press conference that he considers this to be a temporary suspension and that the deal would still be open to him at some point in the future. I'm asking you what you think he should do. Should he
Well,
actually
right now,
write it
all I
off?
can say, it's off the table. So I can't talk about sometime into the future. That's a big statement. But right now, it's off the table. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Ambassador?
Yes, the word suspend was chosen carefully by all the parties. Suspend, by definition,